meeting recording. So a little background on Axiomatic, who we are. We're a state and local government contractor located in Portsmouth. We do what we call business process reengineering, software development, and a slew of professional services. Everything really relates around property taxation. That's kind of our focus. Um, we've done a few notable projects in New Hampshire, mostly with the Department of Revenue Administration, the municipal tax rate setting portal, which some of you may have heard of. That's how schools, villages, towns, and cities file all their information with the Department of Revenue, and they calculate tax rates from that. We also manage the DRA equalization system, which is used to validate real estate transactions to develop the total assessed values for each town and school district, which are used for tax rate setting. And then the Mosaic parcel map, which is a compilation of locally assessed values and parcel data, which is combined in a geospatial information system. So that's who we are. I don't want to talk about us for too long. So let's focus on the project at hand, and that's really to do three things are our goals here with this project. Number one, create an enterprise data management system for the MS9, which is the report of trusts and capital reserve funds, and the MS10, which is a report of common fund investments. So the first thing we're doing is building an enterprise data management system that can be used by all the trustees and by the Department of Justice to manage this information. The second thing we're doing is streamlining the data input for financial institutions and preparers. So that's a big thing, is integrating with all of you all, and that's why we're having this webinar today, to make sure that you understand what we're trying to get done, and we can make sure we work cooperatively to provide the trustees with the best service possible. And we're going to be talking about some of the data imports that we're going to be making available for the financial institutions and preparers, so you can export information out of your existing management systems and get it into this new enterprise data management system. And then, of course, we want to automate the DOJ review as much as possible. So when all this data comes into the Department of Justice, they go through and they analyze the information. And so working through to build automated filtering and review interfaces for them is another big focus that we have here. So there are existing PDF forms out in the world that the Department of Revenue has published. They were built as a carryover when they were building the tax rate setting portal. And DRA didn't choose to automate these forms because they really are not used for much at DRA besides tracking which funds have been created and which ones have been sunset. DOJ really does the bulk of the review on this form, and they're the ones who look at all the different financial information and determine if things are being, or if trustees are investing their funds prudently. So I know there were some issues with those forms. They didn't have sense. They didn't allow you to carry your information over year after year, and people found that the data entry was really too much to deal with. So there were a lot of people who chose not to use the forms. So those are going to be thrown out completely. So let's not worry about PDF forms anymore. This new system is going to be a web-based application that will allow the trustees of the trust funds to manage all of their information. And when they do their electronic filing through the system, it will meet the Department of Justice and the Department of Revenue Administration filing requirements. So when you submit through this, it'll send the information to both places, and you won't have to send paper copies anymore. It'll also be a single repository for information year after year. And that's an important thing. Obviously, trustees come and go depending on what their terms are. And it's important that you have all of this information in one place. So when a new trustee comes on board, all they need to do is get access to the system, and then they can go back and look at previous year's filings and look at all the information that's accrued over time. So that's a really important thing, especially when you have turnover in this position. There are two workflows that we're going to support for this. Number one is what we're calling the ledger-based system. So the application is really going to be a running ledger that allows the trustees to manage their information and roll that information forward year after year. That eliminates the data entry portions and really just relies on them doing updates every year with the information. The other process is to allow data uploads. So we're going to be defining a standard schema, and we'll be providing that to all of the financial institutions and preparers. And essentially, if you can export information out of your existing data management systems in that schema, you'll be able to upload those files directly into the ledgers, and that'll allow you basically to just import information from one system to the next. And from that, you'll be able to export the appropriate forms and e-file appropriately. Any questions so far? Can everyone hear me all right? I haven't heard any feedback, so I just want to make sure everything's coming through appropriately.
Yeah, I hear you fine, David.
Yep.
It's Rebecca.
Great, thank you, Rebecca.
Yep,
Yep, that's fine.
Yes, thank you.
So
yes, thank you.
the ledger concept is really that we'll be asking the trustees or anyone to put the information in the first year, and then once the information is in, really the only responsibility year after year is the delta. So what's the change in the information? And we recognize that with hundreds of trust funds and potentially thousands of investments, asking people to re-enter this information year after year is very cumbersome. So the concept is that they'll have a ledger that is ongoing, and at any point throughout the year when they want to file their documentation, they can freeze a copy of the ledger, which will be saved separately, so that you'll have a running ledger and then the frozen copies, which represent the different filings for each year. There's going to be some enhancements, including the ability to attach instruments, tie the common investments back to the common funds in the MS9, be able to manage the trustee information and the contact information for trustees. So we're really trying to improve this as much as possible and streamline it so it has as small of an impact on the trustees and the financial institutions as possible. So this is the filing platform concept for people who want to use the system as it exists and don't want to upload files into it. So in year one, you'll be asked to do your initial data entry. So that'll be putting all your funds in and putting all your investments in. From that, you can e-file directly the MS9 and 10 form with DOJ and DRA. When you're ready, you can roll the ledger forward to the next year and provide the data update. So that would just be the delta of what's changed, what funds have been added, what funds have been removed, what are the earnings, the losses on these funds. So basically just making updates to the existing information in the ledger. And then when you're ready, you can export your 9 and 10 or e-file those for the following year. And obviously that process would just continue going forward in time. So that ledger will have all the information that you put in the initial year until you remove those funds or add new funds. So really, like I said, it's just going to be that delta that changes every year. And that's what we're going to try to do to really streamline that process for the filers. So for externally managed data, which I'm sure many of you are doing currently, and we did just have a session with the trustees at 10 o'clock. So we've just broken you off into two separate groups just so we can hear your concerns separately. And this would be for financial institutions who are managing this information separately. You might have a separate system that you're doing all the work in. We're going to define the standard schema, which we're working to make as simple as possible. We talked about doing APIs, but really I think we're going to do a flat file, a delimited schema that you'll be able to just run a report out of your systems and upload it into this trustee system. You can upload the files each year. There will be some data matching to ensure data integrity. We'll be looking at, does the beginning of your balance match the end of your balance for the funds that matched? Does everything align? What funds have been removed? What funds have been added? And after we go through the PowerPoint, I'm going to show some wireframes of the initial concepts of the application, which will tie, I think, a lot of these ideas together. So we're going to look at just the workflow very quickly if you have externally managed data and you want to upload reports into the system. So we have our ledger, and we'll take our data report from our external system, and we'll import it into our ledger. And the first year, it's pretty straightforward. We can e-file our 9 and 10 without too much of a problem. We'll roll our ledger forward, and we're now in year 2. And I'll take my data report, and I'll import it into the system, and there'll be a data match. And we'll walk through the data match in a little bit. But essentially what it's going to do is try to align what's in your ledger with what's in the report you're pushing into the system. It'll check the fund balances and do some other things. And once everything matches, it'll be pushed into the ledger, and you can export your 9 and 10 directly. And then that process just keeps running year after year. So essentially, if you're doing externally managed data, the key is that the information matches year over year, and there's some methods which we can talk about to make sure that happens. Any questions so far? Okay, great. Quiet group today. So some of the functionality points that I want to make sure we hit on. Number one is mobile friendly. This will work on a phone. It'll work on an iPad, laptop, desktop. It uses responsive design and Bootstrap to do that. A question we get from the trustees a lot is it Mac friendly? Yes, this is a web application, and Safari is one of the primary browsers that's designed to work with. It'll work with Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome, and Safari. There are different municipal user levels. There are 3 levels, but the municipalities will be given, the trustees will be given credentials, and they have the ability to create accounts. So if your trustees want to grant you as their financial institution an account to go in and manage information for them, they can do that. So you'll be able to get into the system, and if you choose to use the ledger as your primary management tool, you can do that. Or if you want to use your external system and push reports to this ledger system, you can do that as well. Obviously, there's a whole trustee contact management interface where we can track the trustees and figure out or log their contact information, who's the bookkeeper, who's the chairperson, etc. And this is all e-file, so there'll be no paper documents circulating around anymore. So those are just a few of the base functionality points. Stakeholder participation is really important for us in this process. You know, we have a lot of different people involved, hundreds of trustees, the financial institutions, DOJ, DRA, and so we want to make sure that we're hearing everybody's concerns, potential improvements that can be made right from the onset. So that's why we're having these initial meetings, is just to get everyone up to speed, so you're aware of what we're doing. And as we start to refine the specifications more, we're going to be having subsequent web sessions to go through those and get feedback from all the users. As we get into the early springtime, we're going to be looking for beta testers. I think we have some towns who have shown interest already, but we would also be interested in working with some of the financial institutions to make sure that the system works as it was intended to, and that you can provide us feedback from actually working in the real application. So the stakeholder participation piece is ongoing, and that's going to be continuing throughout the project. Any questions so far? So our schedule for the project, we kicked off in mid-September, and right now we're just working on the business requirements and the technical designs. Our go-live date right now is late May. So like I said, we'll be doing UAT and beta testing in the late winter, early spring. And the system will be ready for the fiscal year filers this year, and then obviously in 2019, the calendar year filers. So I'm going to go through some initial wireframes we developed, and essentially what these are conceptual layouts of how the program will function. And so this is by no means the final specification or the final wireframes, but I think it might help to tie some of the ideas we talked about together if we go through some of these potential screens. So I'm happy to take any questions or comments before we jump into this, if there are any. Okay, sounds like we don't have any comments, so I'll jump in. So obviously it's a web-based application. You'd be logging into the system. When you log in, you'll just have a unique username and password. It's pretty standard. Password rules, reset questions, etc. When the users log in, they'll have a dashboard that will have information about their filings for this year, their MS9, their MS10. Menu running down the left side of the screen. The menu has different options. These are the primary levels of the application, essentially the reported trust funds ledger and the common investments ledger. From this dashboard, as a user, I could go right to my contact information for my trustees. I could log all my trustee information as well, first names, last names. Are they the bookkeeper? Are they the chairperson? I could jump right into one of my ledgers. So in this case, we'll look at the MS9 ledger, the reported trust funds. And essentially, it's a data table. By default, the funds would be rolled up. It'll give you high-level information about fund name, type of fund, purpose, balance. And as you click on any of those fund records, it'll expand and show you the detail about the fund. Obviously, we're going to be pulling end-of-year balances forward to create beginning-of-year balances. End-of-year balances will be calculated automatically. So really all we'll be looking for is, once the information is in the system, for any information about new funds, gains and losses, etc. There'll also be the ability to attach instruments to each of these funds, so you'll be able to go back and view instruments and attach instruments, so it's a good data management piece there as well. And there's no limit to the amount of funds that could be added. You could go ahead and add a new fund, put in the basic information about it, and when you save it, you can go in and then update with the balances and the fund detail or the gain and loss detail. Once you've updated all your information for the year, you can roll your ledger very simply. You'll select the Roll Ledger button. It'll provide you with some details. The e-file portion of this, as far as will there be a checkbox and what exactly the e-file language will look like, is still being determined by some of the legal departments. Once that is determined, this will be finalized, but essentially it'll be some variation of this, checkbox, first and last name and date. And then essentially the ledger will be rolled forward into the next year. So from that point, you'll freeze a copy of this ledger from which you can run your reports if you want to have a paper report. The system will be using SQL Server reporting services. So essentially that will allow you to preview reports and then export them to PDF, Word, Excel, TIFF, anything you want. The e-file process, like I said, will meet the filing requirements for DOJ and DRA. So once you submit your information through the system, it'll be at both departments and can be readily used. The next thing I want to talk about is the file upload, which will probably be the more important piece for many of you. Once you've obtained that standardized file out of your system, all you need to do is go to the Upload File button, browse for it just like you would with locating a file to upload to an email. Once you've identified the file, what the system is going to do is look at all the existing funds in your ledger that you see here on the left and try to identify automatically which funds in your uploaded file are matched. So it'll essentially look for all the matches. And for every fund that matches, it'll look at your end of year balance and make sure it equals your beginning of year balance. If funds do not match, they'll ask you to take an action on it. And that'll either be to indicate that the fund has been closed or to manually match the file to a unique list that'll be populated. So you can see here if the end of year and beginning of year balances don't match, you get a little warning icon. So here it's just showing that I can indicate that this fund is closed and this fund had a slightly different name, so I matched it. Once everything matches and you look good, you can move forward, look at all the new funds that have been created. So obviously we want to be able to quantify what the new funds are. If everything looks good from there, you can upload the file into the system and your ledger's been updated. So if you externally manage data in your own enterprise management system, the file upload will be all you need to do to get new information into the ledger. So we're trying to make this as streamlined as possible for all involved. Any questions or comments so far?
I have a question.
Yeah.
In uploading, earlier you said something about a delimited file.
Yes.
How about an Excel spreadsheet?
Yeah, well, a delimited file could be CSV, which would be very similar to an Excel spreadsheet, but you should be able to, if you match that standard format, make your Excel spreadsheet match what we need and then save it as a CSV. That could work as well.
Okay.
And prior to the system going live, when we, obviously we're going to provide you all with the schema as soon as it's designed, which should be in the next month and a half or so. Well, then after we've developed the software and it's in testing, we'll be asking you to send us copies of the file that your systems have created or that you think will match our schema. And we'll validate those files prior to the system going live to make sure they work correctly. So we'll just make sure that if you have an IT department and they get the schema and they build a report, we'll test it prior to the system going live just to make sure it's compliant. Because obviously the worst case scenario is that you think you have a report that'll work, you try to upload it and it doesn't work, and then you're trying to meet the filing deadline and it can get a little hectic.
Right. All right. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Okay, so I'll just go through a few more things quickly here. MS-10 ledger or report of common investments. It looks very similar. You have a ledger with all the information. You can expand any of these, give your fund breakdown. Same rules apply. End of year balance will roll forward to beginning of year balance. End of year balances here will be calculated, and it's really just providing the delta. One of the things things that's changing with this system is we want the ability to associate common funds listed on the MS9 with the actual investments. So in this case, we have, our 36 shares of 3M. If I go to manage fund investments, it'll essentially provide me with a unique list of common funds and say, all right, which common fund is associated with this investment? And it can be a one-to-one. In this case, I'm saying my common cemetery holds 100% of these shares. Or I could add additional lines and say, I have a second cemetery fund that has 50% and my common cemetery has 50%. So you can apportion the shares among many funds if that's how your information is managed. If you report these investments as separate lines, so you have separate, let's say you had 36 shares of 3M and then you had another 90 shares that went with a different cemetery fund, that's fine. They won't be lumped up or aggregated. You'll be able to report them all separately. But we do know that people report the information in different ways. One of the initial questions we have is, what's the best way to apportion these values? Should it be by percentage? Should it be by number of shares? Should it be by total value? I don't know if any of you have any initial feedback on that so far. And that's, not a question that I'm expecting everyone to have an answer to today. Going back to our general ledger, once again, obviously with the MS10, there are a few other pieces of information that are captured, and we see we have two tabs up top here, the ledger and the information. If we go to the information tab, we can put in our brokerage fees and expenses. We can list our firms, the amount paid and the expenses paid, and then we can add as many lines as we want to this to add if we have many different brokerages, firms that we're using. So that's just kind of a quick walk through the software. And kind of where we're going from here is we're working on the specifications, and we're working with DOJ and DOIT to make sure that everything is specified correctly and everyone's happy with it. Then we're going to be asking you all to participate again, and as we go through some more of the detailed specifications. And in between that time, we're going to be posting these web sessions to YouTube on our YouTube channel and putting the presentation up on our knowledge base, and I'll send out that link to everyone following the meeting. And essentially, we'll be giving you the opportunity to provide us feedback for the next few months as we're developing the specs to say, I'd like to see this, or have you considered this use case? And really, as much feedback as you can provide us with, we'd be happy to take it, because there's so many people involved in this. And one thing that we've learned in working with all New Hampshire municipalities is that every municipality likes to do things slightly differently. So just because we think we found the most common use case doesn't mean there are a few others that we haven't considered. So any questions or comments so far? Okay, well, like I said, we'll be posting this information, so feel free to view it after this meeting or provide it to other people who work at your companies if you'd like them to learn more about it. And as I said, we'd be happy to take feedback. Feel free to send me an email at any point. I believe you all have my contact information. Like I said, I'll be sending an email out following this meeting, so I'd be happy to hang on the line if there are any more questions. If not, thank you all very much and enjoy your weekends.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.